Hi there, Dan French here. Welcome wherever you are. I know we've got folks from North America, Europe, and even further afield. So thanks for joining me. This is a talk which is kind of extended from something I was meant to be giving today, actually, at the Shared Services Leaders Conference in London. And like pretty much every other conference, that's been postponed till later in the year. So we're kind of in strange times, as we all know. If you happen to be in a part of the world where you're not in strange times, I can tell you it is strange. A lot of working from home, more than normal, a lot of social distancing, a lot of conference calls, a lot of these things. And one of the reasons I decided to do this is, apart from the fact all my business travel's been curtailed for the time being. So I thought I'd had comments from various people who said, well, why don't you just share what you're going to share with us by a web event? Because we're doing conference calls back to back all day anyway, so it might be nice to have a change of pace. And I don't know whether this is it, but I'll give that what we can. So I'm going to talk through a few topics. I want to share them with you. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to try and make it conversational, although that's tricky because I haven't worked out how to make this two-way. But you can ask questions to go through, and rather than questions, by all means, ask those. But if there's kind of topics you'd kind of like to dig deeper into, that's kind of thing I would like to see, because I think in this period we're in, I think probably I'll be doing quite a few of these, because I've probably got more time on my hands because I'm not traveling so much, and most of my interaction with clients and business partners is virtual, like I guess yours is. So I'll do a few more of these. So if any topics here you want to dig deeper into, let me know and we'll see what we can do. So that's me in self-isolation. I know quite a few of you, some of you maybe I don't know. I am actually today in our head office in London, and that is a great form of self-isolation because I'm the only one here. Which is this is better self-isolation and social distancing than I can get at home, which is quite something. So there you go. That's me. I'm here. The thing about it is, you can, as I say, a few topics. Hopefully, there's some things that might spark your imagination. Feel free to just, if at any point you get completely bored, just sign off. But remember, in these days of social distancing, self-esteem is fragile. And remember, so is mine. Don't have to take that too seriously. So these are kind of themes I want to talk about. I want to talk a bit about the journey for shared services and GBS. And if you saw on the title slide, I've actually added IS, as in information systems, to this. This is really a GBS shared services conversation. But I was asked by a CIO of a very large organization to give the talk to his team. And it kind of resonated so much, I think it's worth bearing that in mind. So talk a little bit about that shift to digital. I'm trying to separate out the kind of the hype from the reality. Talk a little bit about the burning house. The whole idea of the burning down the house is, if shared services, GBS, the whole organization burnt down tomorrow, would we build it the same way again? And I think we all know we probably wouldn't, but the interesting thing is to look at those ways we might address it. Look at that, look at imperatives, expectations, and impact. Talk a little bit about global processes, end-to-end processes, the digital advantage, the automation piece, something I want to call the process universe, decision-making and data, the new house, what should it be when we rebuild it, and what are we learning? So these are kind of themes, and I'm going to give you a kind of little snapshot on each of these. As I say, happy to dig deeper in at a future point. This is my point of view, and this is a point of view of Consider Solutions. We kind of focus on this kind of objective of getting world-class or best in class. And on the left-hand side, you can see what we really mean by that, which is helping the organization drive better business results, reduce the cost of finance and operations, optimize cash flow, and have better risk management. And of course, it's not there, but it's probably more and more relevant at having a good place to work. This whole current situation we're in forces you to think a little bit about the place to work. I mean, the news is full of companies basically forcing employees to take 2 months unpaid leave, laying off large swathes of staff really quickly, and of course those people who are not particularly if they're contractors or whatever, they don't really necessarily have any fallback from social support from governments. On the right-hand side is kind of the way in which we approach those issues. Financial control and compliance, ICFR, is a big focus of what we do. Broader risk management, enterprise risk management, a bunch of that. And on the right-hand side, process transformation, which is broadly what we're really talking about today. And all that built on, how do we use technology and data to drive and optimize in those. These are some of the companies we work with. No big deal, some of you on here, not that you're no big deal, but this is just to give you a sense of what drives the conversations we're having and what drives these thoughts. So GBS, shared services, we all know the history. It was all about, initially, we centralize, we get economies of scale, stuff that looks obvious transactional activity which we could centralize around the world. Makes a lot of sense. So that's a history. You know it as well as I do. What's interesting is the past 10 years have been this optimization phase, and global process ownership has really come out, has become a popular topic, and it falls into this thing I'm going to talk about, the Dunning-Kruger curve shortly. But global process ownership, very, very popular. Everybody's got them. Not necessarily sure that as many organizations actually know what it is they've got, or what it is they want. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The kind of center of expertise versus process, integrating multifunction activities into GBS. And of course, all this time, productivity is getting better and better. So that's great. But of course, you can't have this conversation without talking about digital. And the only reason I put this slide up here, I like the fact that his robot's is frustrated. He's pissed off, actually, you can see. So I quite like that. And the reason that's there is whenever, our executives, and we're all asked to go and talk to, learn from the digital natives, right? And that's all sounds wonderful. Yeah, we should do that. But I don't think it's quite as straightforward as it sounds. So here's an example of a set of companies, many of whom you know, some of which you won't. But these all have a story, and many others, about the digital native world. And I think the interesting thing about these isn't actually the technology. I think the interesting thing about these companies and their approach to digital is the fact there's a couple of key things. One is they're absolutely focused on the consumer rather than economic customer. And that's quite a big deal. And the other one is they're focused on convenience and intimacy. I think those are the big things that make a difference. And maybe end-to-end process integration is a part of that. But if you look at Uber and Airbnb, for example, we know they're just dating agencies, but they are very good at focusing on the ease and convenience and intimacy. Netflix, I'm not going to go through all these, but Netflix is an example. I find an interesting example because, like most of you, I'm a Netflix subscriber. I'm also an economic customer. So in my house, there's 5 users of our Netflix channels. And I get a direct debit out of my bank account every month, I think. I don't even know what that fee is. I don't know how much they take out a month. They never email me, they never communicate to me, they just take the money out, whatever it is. But they're much more intimately involved with the consumers, the 5 consumers who use the Netflix services. They know exactly what the 12-year-old boy wants to watch, and it's tuned to him, and what the 17-year-old girl wants to watch, and that's tuned to him, and indeed what the 19-year-old boy wants to watch, if indeed they're serving that stuff up. But the point about it is they've turned the world on its head, because we've all been told that the customer is king, right? Meaning the person that pays. Well, that's not necessarily true anymore, and I think that's kind of really interesting, and it's even true anyway. I'm sure you can think about that in your own world. I'm not going to all the others, but we could talk about any one of those at great length, and many others. But I think that's a key thing to think about. Focusing on the consumer rather than the economic customer is something that comes out of this, and the drive to intimacy and convenience as an overriding sort of delivery value. And we know Amazon's a great example of that. So, and then, of course, these digital natives are not really banging on about the technology they use very much. And I do think it's overplayed. So this is a kind of my little take on transformation, another word that's used a lot, probably overused. So this picture here, you might be wondering what that picture on the left is. There's a prize for anyone who gets it. That is the Impossible Waterfall. You've probably seen it before. Dutch artist. If you look at it and follow it through, it doesn't make any sense because the water's going uphill. Anyway, Dutch artist Escher did that. Probably spent too much time in the Dutch coffee shops, I imagine. Anyway, so on the right-hand side is the process model for Uber, and I use this because what's interesting is about how they've changed and what I think transformation is about. So if you look at the Uber business process, so they open up in a new city, assuming they've acquired the customers and they've got the service providers who are the drivers. When you turn the app on, they locate where you are. You want to do something, they propose a service. They select the service provider on the app. At the point you say yes, they commit the service provider initially. The first thing they do is commit the service provider. Now that's kind of interesting, not least because if you think about that, they're committing the supplier before they commit the customer, which is highly unusual in our business processes. The next thing, even though it's a half a second later, they commit and charge us, the customer. So that's pretty good. And then the other interesting thing is they pay the service provider, the drivers, they pay the service provider within 5 days of the trip. So they get paid in chunks, but no more than 5 days from the last trip. So the service provider, the driver, who might only get paid 70% or 75% of the fee, he's very happy that he gets paid, or she gets paid in, you know, a maximum of 5 or 6 days, because they say if I work for a big company, normally it's 30, 45 or 60 days to get paid, and cash flow is a big issue as a self-employed worker. So the interesting thing about this is the committing and charging customer, well, committing the service provider before the customer is a complete flip from what we used to. Committing and charging the customer immediately means that they have immediate cash. So every one of us works in a business where days sales outstanding is an important measure. That's the amount of time on average it takes to get your cash in the door. Their days sales outstanding is 0. That's unbelievable. You know, if you're trying to get DSO down to 30, you're pretty good, 30 days. Then so they have a massive cash float, and the service provider is really happy as well. So what's interesting about this is none of that's about technology. It's all about rethinking the process and rethinking about how do we drive maximum value for the customer, the supplier, and us as a business. And that's why I think it's not primarily about technology. In fact, the Uber technology isn't even that sophisticated, but it's a great way of running a business and transforming that. So that's worth thinking about. I'm not suggesting we all do it, but it's worth thinking about. So we did on the GBS Shared Services Leaders debate, we did a series of workshops during last year. And these were workshops where we kind of trying to do some research, but they weren't multi-choice questions. These were sort of clean whiteboard. We had a structure how we were going to go through, but it started from a clean sheet of paper. So we asked these shared services leaders, GBS leaders from around the world in different workshops, 10 or 12 at a time. We said, what is it that your executive stakeholders demand of you as a shared services GBS leader? And coming back to my earlier point, you could actually also put in a CIO as well, interestingly. But the first, everybody agreed, the number one thing is direct cost reduction. We have got to continue to drive the cost down through all those classic ways you see there. We've got to improve the business unit experience, so making finance easier, make buying easier, all that stuff. And then we got into, well, the benefits of centralization about enhanced risk management, control and compliance. So that's it. And flawless issue resolution makes sense in a common service center. And then preserving process knowledge that was formerly in the business. So nobody really could argue with that. So that was kind of quite that was quite straightforward. But the interesting bit was, they said, okay, that's what's demanded. Well, what do you aspire to? You're a leader in your own right. You've got a lot of vision and experience. What do you want to do? And the aspirational bit is very interesting. So, and the number one thing, without a doubt, is we want to get an enhanced reputation as a value creator as well as a cost reducer, because we can't keep reducing our cost ad infinitum. We'll disappear down a hole in the ground, because there's a limit to that. Also, there's more that we can get out of common services than just being an economy of scale. So that's a pretty important, and those of you who are shared services GBS leaders know that well, but there's a balance. We still have to do the cost optimization piece. Next one was becoming a center of excellence with the expertise to optimize and automate as well as operate. Now that's interesting because that starts getting into the whole role of what we have conventionally had an IS organization for, the CIO's role, the automation piece, and even possibly the optimization piece. Now, with rapid response technologies like RPA and all the rest of it, GBS, shared services, have been doing quite a lot of automation and optimization themselves. So it does beg the question, why do we have an automation capability in GBS as well as one in the CIO group? Which is why I think there's a growing number of organizations starting to bring the CIO into the GBS the GBS organization. In fact, there are companies today where the GBS leader is also the CIO, which I think is absolutely the way it's going to go. I think there's no doubt about that, particularly in a way in which technology is evolving, because we can't have rapid response automation in one place, and it doesn't make sense to me, but I'm sure that's going to happen. Interested in your views. Next point that came up was enabling global process ownership. They started with the ownership word, and in every one of these we had a discussion about it. So, well, do we really own these processes? If you're talking about end-to-end processes, in GBS we don't own the whole thing, do we? And so in the end, people said, yeah, probably right. So we called it end-to-end process collaboration, and which is a big deal, right? And we talked that in some of the digital natives. And the fourth one is becoming a talent pipeline for the entire business. And the idea being, if we do these other things really well, everybody in your business, HQ, the business units, the function leaders are going to want our talent, which might be frustrating in the first instance, but will definitely demonstrate we've achieved our goals. So I would have thought hopefully you agree with that. And what's interesting is it brings out the difference between expectation and aspiration. So then we asked, what are the levers of your success to work towards both expectation and aspiration? And these are the things that came out. There's no order to the numbers other than it's relevant on the next slide. But, low cost sourcing, that's kind of a no-brainer. Everyone's got that as a lever. It's becoming less and less of an issue, I think, because we're driving benefits in other ways and even driving cost efficiencies in other ways. Simplification and standardization, end-to-end process enablement and ownership, the whole global process owner, GPO thing again. Number 5, a lot of it starts off with RPA and, intelligent automation and AI. But you say, well, hang on, the ERP is still here for the long road, isn't it? Yeah, clearly. So we talked about automation, whether it's ERP, RPA, AI, niche process applications, cloud apps, the whole thing. But what's interesting, and this is where it blurs between the classic shared services GBS function and what the CIO function typically does, is you say, well, that's, how do we know when a problem comes to us? How do we know what's the right route to automate? So this number 4, task assessment framework for a process task automation. So how do we know for a particular problem what's the best way of solving it? Do we extend the ERP? Do we use RPA? Use artificial intelligence? Do we niche process applications or whatever? So a big discussion, and I'm sure many of you are already doing this, is building a task assessment framework for a particular task, particular problem. How do we work out what's the right answer? If you haven't done it, I suggest you do it. Talent and skills. Business partnering is a big, big focus as well. There's a lot made of the term and a lot of business partnering forums, and I'm big on business partnering as a concept. And some people have business partner roles, but really we're talking about a consultative role to understand and engage on the customer, the internal customer, and the customer's customer, up and down that value chain, to really understand how the processes work and how best we can deliver service and add value. But of course, the big question, that the word customer has an inference that you'll do whatever people pay you for. So there's a lot of focus on, we're not just taking money to do anything we're asked, we listen but guide. Okay, interesting point. Then a lot of discussion around data and action-oriented insights. We definitely need analytics for better decisions, faster, better business collaboration, better outcomes. And of course, analytics is one of the big cases, or the big part of the business case for shared services, because if you have it all in one place on big common ERP, then we have all this data, we can manage our business more effectively. It hasn't quite worked out quite as easy as that, but then staff engagement, executive support, organization structure. So we had a look at all that. We, these things came together, and then we gave everyone 5 points to be able to allocate to which they thought were the most important elements. And then what we did is, because some of these are closely related, we clustered them. So, and what came out, clustered and prioritized, has always surprises me. I think it surprised, well, did it surprise us all? It sort of surprised us. You kind of expect the automation 1B to come out top. And maybe because the organizations involved in this are largely pretty mature, pretty sophisticated global businesses, I think they all say, look, we've all automated the hell out of everything. And I mean, we've had a lot of mixed experiences with automation, and our experiences tend to result in, if we try to simplify and standardize and automate stuff, we don't really understand end to end. That's not a great result. So the number one was about this end-to-end process thinking, GPO thinking, business partnering, and having the data to support it. Second one was automation, simplification, standardization, automation. And you might be surprised about C and D. I was a bit, but again, they're sophisticated organizations. I think they felt they're pretty well engaged there, but maybe not. Anyway, that to me is interesting. So global processes are seen as a value creating strategy. So the end-to-end across the organization, global, obviously, across all the operations of the business, lots of stakeholders, driving ongoing performance, and lots of systems and lots of complexity there. But it is regarded as a big push. Now, so examples are the kind of the front end, the revenue cycle, the customer to cash. And I'm putting these up to make us think about end-to-end global processes, because still a lot of organizations are still trying to focus on solving specific problems. And there's no problem with solving specific problems in one phase, but we've got to have an eye to the bigger picture. So lots of stakeholders and an end-to-end process from demand through to sale, delivery, and cash. And then on the cost side, on the demand side of procure to pay, like source to pay, same picture. And it's kind of important to think about the end-to-end picture because they all relate to each other, and both on the revenue side and the procurement side. The business problems we spend a lot of time trying to automate and innovate our way out of tend to be on the right-hand side, to automate our way out of problems that are created on the left-hand side. And that's why global process thinking is so key, because if we can shift left and think about the whole end-to-end process, the customer and stakeholders across all of this, will end up being able to eliminate a lot of stuff that doesn't matter and make life a lot better for all of us, and also have a much more integrated process for our consumer. Coming back to that point. But one of the problems is with these end-to-end processes is, so marketing, sales and marketing and finance don't necessarily see eye to eye. Procurement and accounts payable don't necessarily see eye to eye. So there's differing perspectives and different performance measures behind the functional leaders in these end-to-end process, which is a challenge. And I know many of you have been through all this. It's hard. So our goal has to be, how do we bring these lighthouses together so we've got a common view? It's reasonable to have different focus of functions, but we need to have some kind of harmonization of what we're trying to achieve. So this is just a kind of flip off here into another discussion, but we this year, time flies when you're enjoying yourself, we've just published a global purchase to pay survey. We did a deep survey, 500 organizations worldwide, pain points and challenges. Anyway, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it, other than to say, to reinforce my lighthouse analogy, by far the number one biggest issue in the end-to-end purchase to pay process, by which I mean demand to payment, so source to pay really, by far the biggest were lack of executive alignment and understanding of the end-to-end P2P process challenges, and lack of clarity on accountabilities, responsibilities, etc. And they both play to the lighthouse analogy, right? The lighthouses are not aligned, we're struggling. And I know lots of organizations who've appointed an executive global process owner for the revenue cycle or the purchase to pay cycle, and then backed away a bit from it because they found it a bit problematic. Doesn't mean it was the wrong thing to do, but it is challenging. So we talk about global end-to-end process, and what's interesting about it when we had this conversation is we all talk about global process ownership. It's all great, but what are the capability and skills we need? The little images there are meant to illustrate all of us are used to running up and down a tunnel, in various functions. Very clear, up and down the function, run up and down that tunnel as fast as you can. But the reality is, when we're looking at the big picture, that's when we get the insights, and that's kind of getting the 25,000 foot view so we can actually have a look down on the maze. So the capability and skills to drive process focus, true global process focus, is how do I engage with my internal customers and external customers down the chain? How do we communicate with them? How do we get understanding? How do we then collaborate with them? If you like, this is a spectrum. How do we collaborate with them? How do we develop a shared vision? And how ultimately do we have coordinated execution to optimize and innovate? Now, if you can do all those things, my question is, does it matter who owns it? And my observation is, I think we jump too quickly to global process ownership without dealing with these other 6 key issues. And there are many global process owners out there saying, I'm struggling with the other stuff, the first 6. So just something to think about. And indeed, some companies, I think they're changing the title. Because imagine, you're in shared services and you go to see the head of procurement say, by the way, I'm the global process owner for purchase to pay. I'm here to talk to you. The answer is probably, oh, you are you? So lots of things to think about there. So that's a little bit in that perspective. We're going to talk a little bit about another kind of dimension to this now, the whole kind of digital technologies piece, transformation, automation. It's, we know this has had a massive focus of investment and interest in recent years. This is important. The more I think about it, I think 70% is a low number, but I can't remember who this came from. Might be McKinsey, but might be wrong. 70% of digital transformations don't deliver the value projected in the business case. No big surprise, right? Have we ever, business cases tend to be over optimistic at the best of times, but that's kind of worth thinking about. Now, brings me to the Dunning-Kruger effect. I could use this picture throughout this discussion, but I think it's really, really interesting. And although it's 20 years old, this psychological research has become very popular in the past 2 years. I'm not quite sure why, but it's been used a lot. And first of all, you look at it and go, that's quite funny. You read it, and then first of all you think, maybe it's a bit insulting. And then you think, it's quite insightful. Now, the point about it is, my observation, and I suffer from this, and I'll guarantee you we all suffer from it, is whether you're trying to learn to play the guitar, play golf, implement order to cash process change, whatever it is, an intelligent person typically gets into the situation, assimilates the knowledge, what do I need to know, and very quickly develops a level of confidence about, okay, I think I know what's involved. And that's the spike on the left. So a high degree of confidence with very little experience. And then as you get, if you have the fortune or misfortune to have to dig into the detail, as you go through it, you start realizing the devil's in the detail. It's kind of pretty unpleasant. You go, hey, this isn't what I thought. It's much more gnarly. And as you go through that over time, you get a level of expertise, your confidence raises, but ironically never to the level it was when you were a little bit naive about it all. Now, to me, we all suffer from it in every field of endeavor, personally, in personal lives and in business. But it kind of it does answer a few questions for us, because you can kind of think, how does that affect in my business? Well, one of the reasons transformations fail to deliver, or most things fail to deliver what was in the business case, is, and there's a few obvious reasons, but one of them is people think, well, it's going to come in, we've got a new person come in, we're going to transform P2P. Yeah, pretty straightforward what we've got to do. Okay, here's what it's going to cost, here's what we're going to do, off we go. And then as you get into it, you realize actually there's more to it. Anyway, Dunning-Kruger has a massive effect on our lives, whether we like it or not. So bear that in mind. If you take any one thing from this, I'll take that. In fact, go to your next meeting with your steering committee, with the executive stakeholders, and use this. You'll get a few. You might get a few blank looks, and you get a few laughs. But there's a lot in here. So, digital technologies, all this stuff. You can see all this research that says yes, it's very, very important. Organizations think these new technologies are absolutely critical. We've got to spend a lot of money on them. Yeah, great. So most of you, I think, already had some experiences or had quite a lot of experience with RPA. But I was talking to a GBS leader who told me, and this is not uncommon, told me, I think it's about 2-3 years ago, he said, we heard about RPA, and the CEO told the head of GBS, said, right, we've got to have 100 bots on the floor by September. So we went off and started cracking out these things, and then we now look back and go, what were we talking about? What on earth were we thinking? And of course, this is an example of Dunning-Kruger as well. It seems when somebody comes up with a really rapid automation approach, you say, and it solves all the problems, you go, wow, it's great. On face of it, wonderful. But this also suffers from Dunning-Kruger. So this will probably summarize most of your experiences, and if you don't have any, it'll summarize your, it might be worth bearing in mind. But basically, some good stuff at RPA, all the stuff at the top, big efficiency gains for the right tasks. It is, of course, robotic task automation, not robotic process automation, which is one of the problems. And the Dunning-Kruger curve particularly reflects the fact that people assumed it would apply to end-to-end processes. The bit at the bottom is kind of more of the real experience. So these big productivity increases you hear about, they may not be significant in the end-to-end process. There's a load of issues around developing technology that fits into an ecosystem and it needs lots of control and governance and integration with ERPs and lots of other things. But the thing I love about this is the two quotes at the bottom. Automation makes bad worse faster. That was Walmart. They're one of the early folks down this, and I think that's just a wonderful quote. I mean, and that's not just to do with RPA. Generally, it's true. So if you got a bad process, automation make it bad, much worse, much faster, and the implication of that could be much more horrible than you think. Because the waste products of poor processes get produced faster as well. And eliminations of S automation goes without saying. What can we take out of the process? Just get rid of it. So I kind of I like that. And then everyone's now obviously very excited about the role of AI. And I'm not going to do an AI dissertation here, but the most popular, or a big element of this is around people being fixated on machine learning because the self-driving car, all the stuff we see with some of the banking applications. And machine learning is basically, rather than programmatic if then else, programmatically describing how you want software to work. Machine learning is about using very large bodies of data to observe statistically what is normal and what is abnormal. Then with a bit of guidance, you can work out what is good and what is bad. And that's very powerful. So what's interesting about this is we've learned some stuff about this as well. Another Dunning-Kruger curve here. So when machine learning became sort of to the really up the public eye, and we had the capability to deal with it 2 or 3 years ago, some very smart cookies decided to say, well, we've got a big problem in cancer diagnosis. In cancer diagnosis, if you've got suspected cancer, you get a blood test, put a drop of blood on a slide, and a very experienced pathologist has to look at it for some time under a high-powered microscope and work out whether you have any nasty cells in there. So these guys and girls said, well, hang on, this is a data problem. If we can digitize the blood sample, the image of the blood sample, machine learning must be able to tell what's good and what's bad. So great, wonderful. So they built this AI classifier, a machine learning algorithm, and they found 92.5% of the cases. Brilliant, outstanding piece of software, did that. Then somebody who was a bit of a deciding to pour some doom and gloom said, well, actually, pathologists are better. They hit 96.6% of it. I mean, they take a lot of time. It's manual intensive, but it's better. We'd rather take more time and get right than less time and get wrong. So we're just about to pack their bags up and go home. And somebody said, well, hang on, there's another story here that AI supporting humans is even better. So diagnosis by the expert human and the AI hit 99.5%. And the really big lesson here is humans and software, as we've always known, have different strengths. Humans are better at determining false positives. The AI analytics were better at kind of looking at edge cases and not losing focus, not losing attention. So what this has led to is this idea of, this idea of the kind of the doom and gloom scenario of AI is kind of largely nonsense. This whole point about effectiveness and efficiency, and humanistic AI is a term put together. Tom Gruber is a very smart guy, Dr. Tom Gruber. He's got a TED talk on this. If you're interested in it, I recommend you look at it. You can search on how AI can enhance our memory, work, and social lives. The point being, by using AI to support experts, we're going to get much better decisions, faster decisions, and at much greater scale, but we're still going to need the experts. So that's kind of an interesting discussion. So it's all about this balance. We spend a lot of time, and if it almost comes back to the expectations and aspirations discussion, we spend a lot of time on best execution, how to reduce the cost, execute fast, automate the execution. The real experience with the humanistic AI has led us to the belief that actually we might be losing track of it on this whole thing about best decisions. So efficiency versus effectiveness, we've got to have a healthy balance of both. We don't want to be efficient in doing a suboptimal thing. We want to be efficient in doing optimal things. So it's about best decisions meets best execution. Now, the best decisions require data. Okay, so this is a whole data conversation. Now, this statistic I couldn't believe, and I still struggle to believe it, but it is true. Well, I'm told it's true. I try not to do that, and I'm not totally in finance. So, but 80% of effort is spent acquiring and preparing data, leaving as little as 20% for value-added analysis and decision-making. And we kind of know the reasons for that, right? But we tend to think it's a technology problem, and here's why it isn't. So here is a really, it's a technology problem as well, but this is interesting. If you ask the question, how many countries are there in the world? There are 6 perfectly accurate answers to that question. And when you ask a consultant the question, they normally say it depends, because it makes a clock tick longer. But it depends is actually a good answer, because when you say how many countries are in the world, so why you're asking what's your real question? It's a bit like saying, well, how many customers have we got? How many suppliers have we got? Well, when you say how many suppliers, I can say we've got 563,000 suppliers. Does that help you or not help you? Or do you mean how many suppliers are we trading with currently? Do you mean how many suppliers we've traded with in the past 12 months? Do you mean how many approved suppliers? Do you mean how many ones where we have a strategic performance program with? There's lots and lots of questions, and usually the questions are not precise enough. So this, to me, says a lot about why we have this problem with data, and it also leads to another big problem in that we might be addressing the problem from the wrong end a bit. So when we normally try and get data responses, analytics and all the rest of it, we still have, traditional and even supposedly agile responses are too slow, because even today you can buy some very sophisticated technologies. You spend big capital expense. You've got to implement some stuff, do requirements analysis of the people who understand the processes. You've got to configure the stuff. You've got to go through, and there's still a heck of a cycle time, and keep iterating through that. Now, yes, things are better than they were 10 years ago, and 5 years ago, and 20 years ago, but it's not good enough in my feel, and we've got to get rid of that. We've got to do something different, because the other piece is rear view mirror reporting. It's no longer an advantage. I mean, that's just table stakes, right? You've got to be able to do that, and particularly in our current world. But this is, we're in volatile times right now, in case anybody needed telling, but we're in volatile times. But we know, and when things are pretty static, you can probably require, you can get away with your rear view mirror, because the future looks a bit like the rear view mirror, and just let's do it a bit faster. Volatile times, you need much better, faster decisions and immediate insight. And that isn't my heart rate, by the way. That's you get a prize if you can work out which company's stock price it is. Anyway, volatile times, but it's not just about stock price volatility. It is, when we don't know quite what's going to happen today and tomorrow, we need to be able to have a close hand on the tiller of the boat and make sure we can make rapid decisions to change course. We can't wait. So, what we're looking for is people to have some really dynamic real-time data around their processes. This happens to be the source to pay process, and then drilling down in, but it's going to be the revenue cycle. It can be anything. But the point about it is, I think we're moving to a world where I think analytics and the way in which you get data responses has got to change. We've got to be much faster. We need some really specific. We need some specific process-aware capabilities, and I'll talk a little bit about it. But the key point is, we want to have action, immediate action, not start a process and then in 3 months' time I might get the report which might allow us to do stuff, or I might have a very, very sexy sort of visualized view of the world, but if I want new insights, I've still got to work on it, right? So here's a kind of a prediction I'm going to give you. So I think the future operating model for data insights is going to be like this. I think it's going to be real time and continuous. So we've gone through all this data lake, data warehouse, data ocean, data universe, and And it's, we've not cracked that at all. We need real-time access to data and continuous. Machine learning is important because we need to learn from the data large bodies of data as it occurs. We need to focus on data-driven decision-making. So focus on decisions, not on reports. Now, the big piece is we've worked out it needs to be process-specific and process-aware. And the reason for that is if you're going to avoid people having to keep doing their own sort of configure their own reports, configure their own analytics, mess around, doing the 80% stuff that doesn't focus on 20%, you need something that really understands the business process. So you need something that is tuned and understands the process it's analyzing, and thus understands the issues and performance measures and questions you need to answer. So specific to a process and process aware. So that means in the future, we won't have general data analytics platforms. We'll have process-specific, process-aware platforms for the key processes of the company. It's going to have to be software as a service for all obvious reasons, for speed, for not having all that unpleasantness hanging around. There's going to be no IT project stuff involved, and there's going to be no big consulting fees involved. So, I mean, I think that's a future model for it. But the other piece is, excuse me, this continuous data also addresses this issue on business partnering, global process collaboration. We talked about this capability and skills, engagement, communication, understanding earlier on. And if you think about data today, we are pretty good at having KPIs and metrics that kind of do what our car dashboard does. It says, oh, you got red light, you got red light here, you got orange light. The trouble is, in today's car, the red light doesn't really help you very much. By the time you got a red light, I mean, you never want to see a red light. You want something else. You want something that, I mean, if you've got an oil pressure light, you don't know whether you've got an oil leak, you don't know whether something's evaporated, something's gone wrong somewhere, but you don't also know whether you should actually drive the car or not. If we had a way of having detailed, continuous execution insight on how the engine, the operating of the engine, and we could see that, like an aircraft cockpit, and not just wait for it for the red lights. Don't know many pilots who wait for the red light. You want to see what's going on in real time. So I think that's the thinking. We've got to get more insight into that. So I talked about process universe, right? This is an interesting concept. So I talked about this. I'm going to talk about it from a P2P point of view, but it's exactly the same with order to cash and any other process, manufacturing processes. But we did this survey, as I mentioned, and that's the reason we did it. We're going to talk about it, but the reason we did it was every survey we'd seen was leading a witness towards a specific answer. So we wanted to do something objective. And those of you who have P2P or source to pay under your responsibility will identify with this. I think even if you don't, you'll identify with it. These are the big issues, the big themes. You can't really argue with those big 6 issues. Those are the big things that everyone wants to do better. But when we look at the universe, one of the things that's interesting, it wasn't long ago when we thought our ERP was the single way in which we automated the process. But you look at the stakeholders in P2P, so sourcing, finding the right vendors, buying, getting the stuff, paying for it. We also got to bear in mind that Treasury have got great interest in the cash. So payment terms and the way in which we pay is critical to them. So these are kind of the stakeholders. But as I say, we used to believe, well, it was often the case that we had this idea of the big all-encompassing ERP, and our process universe and our systems universe was the same thing. We had a big system. But now the universe for any process, and this is P2P, but it could be anything. We've got our ERP, which here might be the single source of truth, perhaps, but lots of other things going on. We might have insourced, outsourced, we've got contract management, we've got vendor master data, we've got P cards, we've got T&E, we've got contract-based purchasing for direct purchasing, we've got some kind of workflow and OCR add-ons to our ERP, we've got an Ariba or a Coupa or a Basware, we've got an e-invoicing suite, and whatever the next big thing is. We've made life really complicated for ourselves because this is what we got. And every process, I encourage you to do the universe picture for every process. I mean, it's not enough alone. You need the end-to-end process view, but and then we've got that across multiple business units, the globe, all that stuff. That's pretty problematic. So when you're looking at trying to, in fact, I'll go back. When you're looking at trying to drive process excellence, we have a habit of focusing in on the most recent big thing we started on. So I mean, noticeably, master data does not get enough attention in most organizations at all, even though it's the fuel that drives the processes. So you might have implemented e-invoicing, for example, or a P2P suite, and everything is focused on making sure that that's working as well as it can do. Well, that's fine. But what I actually want to know is, how's my whole universe operating? Where are the hot spots and cool spots? And what can I learn across the piece and to drive enhancement of the most effective channels? So driving process excellence, I showed you this chart earlier. So if I have a way to be able to get all that data from across the universe, this, if I could get all that data from across the universe and be able to use it to drive decision making and drill down into detail, what we found is interesting is, and it's another piece about, maybe it's Dunning-Kruger again, you'd think that if the problems in our business processes were all systemic, i.e. could be solved by changing the system, then the results and inefficiencies and all the rest of it would be pretty consistent across the organization. Here's an example for a business where the inefficiency and cost overhead in a P2P process gets massively worse for certain business units. Well, by definition, that shows it's behavioral and not systemic. So immediately starts getting to the business partnering conversation, what's going on in these top 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 business units. And then we're going to start to drive into how does that affect our channels of operation? And again, poor performing vendors. How do we know, why are some of our vendors worse performing in terms of operational activities than others? And some of it might be their fault, might be our fault, but at least let's look into it. And then talk about master data. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I just want you to think about this idea of driving down sharp data to make decisions on today. How's our PO compliance looking by a different channel? What are the exceptions? All that stuff. What's interesting also is tail spend. Where's our tail spend? It's fascinating to me that nearly, I mean, it's a bit of the 80-20 rule, really, but certainly in many cases, 50% of the vendors are responsible for kind of 10% of the spend. Now, that is, to any procurement expert, that's common, but it'd be great to be able to look into detail about what we actually got going here. What are these things happening? And there's some examples of some very small spend here. And then looking at this channel of all these different galaxies in our universe, which of the channels is most effective? Which has the most exception levels, which has the most overhead, which is the most costly, and which is the most efficient? And then we can start to drive those behavioral effects towards the most efficient channels, because we have a number of them. And that has been a fascinating piece of work. And then metrics by shared service. Again, that's all behavioral. So we talked about the house, the shared services house. By the way, as we're going through this, remind you, any things you would like to dig deeper in, not today, but for a future discussion, we can do on a similar basis while we're all isolated. Yeah, just pop me a question there. So these are the things that we're learning, right? So the imperatives and expectations, global process simplification focused on the consumer and our business, not just the economic customer. Come back to what we discussed at the beginning. I think this is a really big deal. I think end-to-end process transformation, I'm very wary of the word transformation, but you know what I'm saying. End-to-end process focus versus stage optimization. It can be scary, but stage optimization is kind of, a lot of it is, it costs more than we think for less return than we expect. That's kind of a lot of the RPA experience. Continuous improvement, there's no one-hit wonders. We can make some big changes, but there's no kind of, we've never made it. There's no top of the hill. We've got to combine our understanding of process and digital. So there's no point, which is another reason for bringing the CIO function and GBS together, because there's no point having them separate. We've got to drive change across the organization from cost to value. Yes, we've got to be best cost to deliver the value we do, but it's a no-brainer to me. We've got to embrace the front office functions, so get away from just the back office, start thinking, getting GBS more on the front office, which is happening in a lot of organizations. Driving speed and scale of change, using all of these, using the technologies, but also using data-driven insight. And then we've got to learn from the digital natives, but not in the way that some people think. Come back to my point about consumer is king, not the customer, and convenience and intimacy. So what are the challenges? Well, pretty obvious, some of these. So is our consumer-facing business model right for the future? I mean, a whole bunch of issues. You can, the current situation is highlighting some of this as well, because you see some of the big job losses are actually where organizations are prioritizing what channels are most effective to them. Is our operating model right? This global process thing, we have not cracked the code. We've got to do a lot more work on this. We need to apply intelligence to global processes, and we've got to have courage to do that. The whole ownership, accountability, alignment issue. What's the new role of shared services, GBS, the role of IT, all that stuff? Who's the customer? And is customer focus a winning strategy? And now, again, that's another kind of thing we've always been told is important. Some massive shifts have happened. I mean, Henry Ford and Steve Jobs to come to mind. They didn't believe in having a focus on the customer. They had a belief in focusing on building the best product you could, and we will educate people about why this is best. The data strategy is key. We talked about that. It's still archaic what we're doing, and we've got some smart technologies, but we're deploying them in archaic ways. We've got a line, model, process, and digital, and then there's a $1.7 trillion industry in digital transformation, and 70% of it is wasted. Well, maybe not wasted, but just not delivering the results we expected. So here's a little thing which some of you might have seen before. I find this interesting because this is something that McKinsey have been touting for a while, and it's based on the Silicon Valley operating model of Google, Facebook, and the like. They're suggesting the future operating model for business as a whole will be combining the IT and the business operations, the as is and the to be, and the change and everything into 3 horizontal strands: customer experience, customer journey, both delivering the experience, servicing the experience, developing the experience of the technology, changing it, managing the change. The second bit is the business capability, the kind of the digital end-to-end process, the soup to nuts piece. And then the back end bit is the kind of hardcore cross capability IT platforms like identity management, data access, and all that stuff. But again, it's everything that's needed to get the job done. And this idea of mission control is basically a global process owner who really owns it. So they make all the priority decisions, as they identify where the money goes. But that global process owner is, this is the order to cash or the customer to cash process, this person owns the revenue of the company because they are delivering the revenue of the company because they own the customer experience, all aspects of it. If this is the source to pay mission control, this is procurement, this is payables, this is the whole thing. And I was actually running a group panel on a conference recently. And it was good to see a number of companies are bringing procurement and accounts payable together under the same leadership. I mean, I think that's all part of this. But that to me is interesting. I'm not saying there's big challenges for people who have physical products, by the way, but it's worth thinking about. Challenges are thinking. We all know about technology. We should be old enough and experienced enough to know that the inflated expectations, this is kind of a derivation of the Dunning-Kruger, but inflated expectations, let's be clear, let's get to the plateau of productivity as quickly as we can and take the top off that mess at the front. Some nice little lessons along the road. I think, I mean, these are all great things, but I like one of the myths of artificial intelligence is you can AI your way out of something you don't understand. I think it's quite telling, but you hear a bit of that. Oh, we'll AI it. All right, good luck with that. So talent, we've got to get focused on what sort of talent do we need. We used to be focused on experts. I think we know we can't, the I-shaped expert is kind of, we need somebody a bit more adaptable. The generalist, we had a lot of those. We want the T-shaped expert is our future, I think. In fact, so does Jason Yip think that. But this is a useful way of thinking for your HR people and for your leadership, thinking about what sort of people we're looking for. There is a massive, again, this is Dunning-Kruger all over the place, right? That curve. We all believe there's a silver bullet. We all believe there's an easy fix, but there isn't. This guy got the Nobel Prize for, I was going to say Peace Prize. It wasn't a Peace Prize. He was for medicine, Nobel Prize for medicine. And he said basically, few things in life are erase a single problem at stroke. You've got to make 100 small steps, go right, one after the other, no slip ups, no goofs, everyone pitching it. This is also related to the aggregation of marginal gains, which was popularized by the British cycling team in the Olympics a while ago. This is really worth thinking about when we're managing change in GBS, across the organization. And what it means is, a terrible thing is, it means we got to learn how to help our organizations create and change habits, because making change stick is that. So I can't go into this in a lot of detail, but it's a really important topic. If you accept that there are no silver bullets, then our job has to be creating new habits as leaders. That is a hard game. So this came out of a recent talk about process transformation. Again, it comes to the habits. How do we follow through to the end? The gnarly, nitty-gritty realities of execution. This is a critical thing. So it's kind of interesting. So it is a bit of a shocker in some respects, but there isn't. Whatever the technology, whatever the plan. The military are very good at saying no plan survives first contact with the enemy, which I rephrase to say no plan survives first contact with reality. It's really, really important to realize there isn't one big answer. It comes back to this guy about aggregation and marginal gains. So it's all about execution and getting things done. And that is the hardest thing of all. This is a great book. If you haven't read it, it's worth a read. It makes you a bit depressed when you realize where we fall short in it, but it definitely gives us tips for execution. And the point is, when we're making change, if execution is about making change and getting stuff done, which is about habits, then we've got to think about how do we motivate and manage change. There's a lot of talk about this. You all remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a basic essence of humanity, that you need. If you don't have basic physiological needs, you don't need to worry about everything else. But these build up, and we're in a very fortunate world, in the developed world, where we're all focused on the top of this pyramid. Interestingly, the current situation we're in is actually making some people worry a bit about the lower ends of the pyramid, which might be good for us all, actually, make us think a bit more about one another. But motivating and managing change, as humans, as animals, we drive towards fear and towards aspiration. And at the bottom end, it's fear that drives us, and the top end is aspiration that drives us. But we're all wired up slightly differently. Some people are more aspirational, some are more about needs. But we've got to work out how to do that. Got to work out how to help that drive the habits we need. So the new house, let's think about the consumer. Do we need to think about separation of our business processes, our new integrated business process? Maybe some companies are separating out the new business from the old business. Look beyond the silos. Automation is important, but let's work out how to add value to the consumer. Talent, data, and working on execution, habits, and motivating change. I think that's going to be a differentiator. In fact, you look at the great businesses, it's a lot about that. So we've talked about quite a few little chapters there. I've talked for a long time. I'm sorry I've spoken so long. If you want, I don't think I've got any time for any of your questions. If you do have any topics you want to get into, just pop me an email or whatever. That's my email address. If you think there's a particular theme on that, or a theme I haven't covered that you think might be worth a slightly shorter session, you might think, understandably, let me know, or drop me send me a question in the panel. There's some really interesting stuff here, and I think this current crisis might give us the opportunity to kind of lift our heads a bit and say, right, we're going to have to make some changes anyway. How about we do the right thing rather than just carry on doing the same things fast? I'd like to thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you managed to get a cup of tea, cup of coffee, or a glass of wine, depending on what time of day it is. With you. I look forward to talking to you again soon. And as I say, enjoy the rest of your day and wash your hands, as they say. Thanks a lot.